Take a journey with us into the past. It's been 50 years since Pan American's first Pacific airmail flight from San Francisco to Manila by a Martin 130 flying boat. It was November 22nd, 1935. We're going to recreate that original journey and take you along on Pan Am's 50th anniversary commemorative flight. On November 22nd, 1985, over 300 people boarded a Pan Am 747 China Clipper II in San Francisco to retrace the flying boat's steps across the Pacific. Stops were made in Hawaii, Midway, Wake, Guam, and the final destination, Manila, in the Philippines. The original historic trip took 6 days. The 50th anniversary flight took 2 days, with an overnight stop in Hawaii. With that first trip, Pan Am opened the doors to the Orient, and has since continued to pioneer air travel around the world. You'll feel the memories of those early Pan Am pioneers, Juan Trippe, Ed Musick, and Charles Lindbergh, carried with us on this fascinating journey.
Through 4 long centuries, man heard no tocsin to spur him on to higher, bolder venture than that which sent him out across the vast Pacific. Across the endless sea first ventured proud Magellan, leading his tiny caravel to sweep forever from the seas the proud old clipper ships. Great ocean liners followed, and here it seemed the saga was to end. Far off China, scarcely 3 weeks distant, men said half a world could surely shrink no more. But between the United States and China lay 10,000 miles of ocean. To meet the challenge, America must span it with a trunk line to Asia. One U.S. company, Pan American Airways, undertook to meet this challenge. Behind it already stood 7 long, successful years of aerial pioneering, logging 50 million flying miles that had established an unparalleled record carrying men, mail, and merchandise over 40,000 miles of aerial trade routes, revolutionizing the tempo of commerce between the 3 Americas. Now the nation's industry joined the pioneers at their task of ocean conquest. Aircraft manufacturers, designers, artisans labored to bring forth huge winged clipper ships. Engineers, technicians, scientists, and a score of allied industries developed tremendous power plants, propellers, 100 instruments. Pan American turned the Caribbean into a working laboratory in which to prove men, methods, and materials. Veteran pilots of airplanes became captains of ocean airliners, masters of celestial navigation, of seamanship. Others became flying engineers to man the power plants, meteorologists to wrest from the skies the secret of ocean weather. Still others perfected radio until it could span an entire ocean with its guiding signals. Ahead into the Pacific went an army of young Americans to build air bases thousands of miles apart across a trio of almost unknown dots on the ocean's map.
Well, having been on duty at Alameda 50 years ago today when the first China Clipper took off, I was mildly impressed then. Now I am horribly impressed. I think this is the greatest thing that ever happened, and I'm so pleased to be included on the passenger list.
What have the years done to make you appreciate that flight more?
Well, I started with Pan American on November the 1st, 1935, and served for 40 years. Every one of those years and every one of the days of those years was just a new challenge and the most interesting career any man could ever have. And this is the icing on the cake of that career as far as I'm concerned.
You can have a favorite leg of this particular trip?
Well, I was on Wake Island on December the 7th, 1941 when the Japanese attacked, so I won't be anxious to stay at Wake very long. I was in Guam in 1936 when the first passenger service started, and it'll be fun to see that again. I was the airport manager for Manila for Pan Am right after the war ended in 1945, so that'll bring back a lot of memories.
Let me ask you this, in a nutshell, describe aviation today compared to 50 years ago.
Well, in one word, it's rapid. In the old days, it took about 24 hours to fly from here to Honolulu. Today, we'll do it in about 5. And it's all so modernized. That's just all you can say. It was historical in those days. Now it's routine, but still fascinating as far as I'm concerned.
Do you ever miss the old Clipper?
Yes, I do. It was a nostalgic sort of a ride. You had berths for everybody. You had a nice dining room. You could play cards. But today you don't have time to do all that, so you just go rapidly and in comfort.
I was on all of the first survey flights, that is the 4 flights before the China Clipper. First one to Honolulu, back, Midway back, Wake back, and Guam and back. And then I made the flight after the China Clipper because I had to be pulled off of the China to navigate the Philippines, which was leaving shortly after that, you see.
What do you think about this ceremony today?
This ceremony, I'm telling you, the whole trip is going to be so nostalgic. I almost get lumps in my throat, actually. Yeah, it's great, and it seems to be getting a lot of public attention too. Yeah.
Well, and deservedly so, don't you think? I mean, this is compare aviation today to what it was 50 years ago.
Well, aviation today, I haven't flown for a while, of course, but it's, I hate to say cut and dry. It's very sophisticated. I mean, everything is by the numbers and computers and so on, see. Back then, you had to do a lot of it on your own. They used to call it flying by the seat of your pants.
Oh, that's where that phrase came from.
Yeah, that's right. We had the best there was available at the time, of course, and we use it. But you still had to improvise, do a lot on your own. See.
Well, we had been there for almost 6 months, and it was quite a feeling to see the plane come in. Of course, we had seen 2 survey flights come in before, but this was the real thing. And it was a feeling of some accomplishment. We'd worked hard there. We had to clear the lagoon of coral heads and do some blasting out there, so it was quite an exercise.
What do you think was the specific market made on aviation? What was it? Was the turning point of what?
Well, it was the very first airplane that was able to fly the ocean with a payload anywhere in the world. And that was a real accomplishment. And because the planning had started almost 3 years before the Clipper came in. And that was the accomplishment.
You were one of the pioneer captains in that Clipper. What was it like to fly over that expanse of water?
Well, it was hard work for me because I was a gopher. I was a junior man on the crew, and I just sat in, relieved the captains and the other pilots and the navigators, whoever needed a 2-hour rest, I took it.
Well, I am very much a child of the Pacific. I used to knock around it incessantly. Wake and Midway were home to me at many times. So I'm here to pay my respects to a part of the world that I love very much and in which I had some very wonderful experiences. Some years ago, I landed in the middle of the Pacific in a small airplane. So at least I've been baptized and never grew tired of it. It's a marvelous part of the world, and I feel very lucky to have been a participant in it.
In your words, what does this event signal to you in terms of the milestone in aviation?
Well, the milestone, I assume you're asking about what we're celebrating. The beginning of commercial service across the Trans-Pacific was not only a milestone for Trans-Pacific air service, but it also introduced, really for the first time, the ability for airplanes to fly long distances over water. And I think the biggest milestone is it shrunk the globe. It was the beginning of the shrinking of the globe. Today, we don't think anything of going anywhere in the world is not out of our reach. And 50 years ago, this was the beginning.
Pan Am was a leader then. And describe the attitude within the company, that pioneer spirit. Why Pan Am?
Well, of course, primarily because of the leadership, Juan Trippe, and of course Lindbergh, Captain Music. These men were right on the edges of the horizon so far as air transportation and air travel was concerned. They were visionaries, and they built a great company. And as I said before, it has brought the world much closer together. And those pioneers played a major role in it.
I'd like to thank you all for being here this morning to take part in a most historic occasion, the 50th anniversary of the commencement of commercial trans-Pacific flight. My name is John Kremski. I'm Senior Vice President for Marketing at Pan Am. The history of Pan American is studded with examples of having broken new ground, of taking risks and doing what others have not done before. And the flight of the original China Clipper from the shores of Alameda 50 years ago ranks among the finest examples of this airline's leadership. The first flight of the China Clipper was the culmination of almost 5 years of research and planning. The decision to open a route to Asia was made in 1931 when Charles and Anne Morrow Lindbergh set out to survey a route across the Pacific via Alaska for Pan Am. Due to the political complications in getting permission to land in Siberia, the northern route was abandoned in favor of the route of the old sailing Clippers via Honolulu, Midway, Wake, and Guam to Manila. Two basic problems confronted Pan Am's management. First, to develop an aircraft capable of carrying an economic payload over the 2,400-mile sector from California to Hawaii, and then to build bases to fuel and service the planes en route. As it had before, Pan Am took the initiative and built equipment and facilities out of dreams. The impossible had been achieved because of strong-willed men and women. With us today are many of those who not only played a direct part in that historic flight in 1935, but who also helped shape Pan American from its inception. And we'll hear from some of them in just a moment.
Now therefore be it resolved that I, Dianne Feinstein, Mayor of the City and County of San Francisco, do hereby proudly proclaim November 22nd, 1985 as China Clipper Day in San Francisco, when a historic 50th anniversary flight of this service will occur, and do commend its observance to all our citizens.
From the very beginning in 1935, when Pan Am began Trans-Pacific service, the United States Postal Department has been one of our absolute greatest friends. And today, representing the Postmaster General, is the highest ranking woman in the United States Postal Service, the Postmaster for San Francisco, Mrs. Mary Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Kremski. It's an honor to be here today to join with Pan American World Airways in celebrating that special day in 1935 when the amazing China Clipper made its historical journey across the Pacific. The 50th anniversary of the China Clipper's pioneering flight has been commemorated by the United States Postal Service with the issuance of an international airmail postage stamp. That stamp was unveiled in February at Treasure Island. On that inaugural flight, November the 22nd, 1935, the China Clipper carried more than 100,000 letters on its trip to Manila, the first airmail to be flown across the Pacific. Today, when the plane takes off, inside the cabin will be more than 5,000 letters which have received philatelic treatment by the Postal Service. On many special occasions, the Postal Service is requested to have special cancellations made available. None could be more special than today's event, commemorating that historical trans-Pacific airmail flight of 50 years ago.
When I was asked to assume the leadership of Pan American 4 years ago, I remember commenting to my wife Sandy that it seemed to present an insurmountable opportunity. And I would be less than honest to not admit that there have been times during these tumultuous 4 years that I wondered whether it was going to end up just that, an insurmountable opportunity. But even during the darkest times, I was buoyed by the realization that in all commercial aviation, Pan Am stands alone in having led that industry at every turn. The list of first is without equal. First to operate a permanent international air service. First to use radio communications. First to offer flight attendants and hot meals aloft. First to cross the Pacific and then the Atlantic. First around the world. First in offering commercial jet transportation. First to usher in the age of jumbo jets. Yes, the list is long and impressive. But an airline or any organization is nothing more than the sum and substance of the men and women who dare to be innovative in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. If there has ever been an example in the history of technological and industrial progress that gives credence to that adage, it is the legacy handed us today by those men and women of Pan American who brought a world together through their energy, foresight, and desire to set trends, to be first. With them stood equally forward-looking and determined pioneers from such companies as Boeing, Pratt & Whitney, and more recently, Airbus Industries, whose technological daring and superiority made our dreams possible. I think it's fitting that the city of San Francisco and the state of California were the setting for the historic departure of Pan Am's China Clipper 50 years ago. It was 150 years ago that the first seagoing China Clippers arrived here in San Francisco. Adventure and risk-taking is at the heart of the rich and varied development of both the city by the bay and California. The original China Clippers carried the mail. More than 100,000 letters to be delivered across the Pacific, from Honolulu to Manila. Mail has been at the root of all early commercial aviation development, and it's appropriate that we have here this morning Mr. James Farley, Jr., whose father, Postmaster General James A. Farley, not only personally delivered a message from then President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, but also stood in Alameda with Chairman Juan Trippe and announced the inauguration of the first scheduled airmail service across the Pacific. Jim, we're delighted to have you with us. We're proud and privileged to have with us representing what actually transpired that morning in 1935, not only Jim Farley, Jr., but Charlie Trippe, son of Pan Am's founder and inspiration for over 40 years, Juan Trippe. Charlie? Your father's name will live forever in the annals of international commercial aviation. He and your mother, Betsy, were true American heroes. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time to prepare to depart. 50 years ago, of course, the technology was quite different than we enjoy today. The calling of the roll to our destinations across the Pacific was accomplished by a telegraph key, with someone translating the transmissions into voice responses. This morning, we'll be doing it by direct voice lookup with Honolulu, Midway, Wake, Guam, and finally Manila, thanks to 50 years of advances by AT&T in communications. Before I recreate that historic moment, however, I would like to introduce the crew of China Clipper 2. And if you wouldn't mind, if each of you would please take one step forward when your name is called. First of all, skipper of our flight today, Captain Don Pritchett. gentleman who will make sure that we get where we're going, Captain Bill Frisbee. Captain Chris Horton. Flight Engineer Pete Wright. Flight Engineer Dick Keller.
China Clipper, Captain Music, stand by for station reports.
San Francisco calling.
Honolulu.
EAA Ocean Air Base number 1, Honolulu, Hawaii. Standing by for orders.
American Airways, Mid-Ocean Air Base number 1, Honolulu. Ready and standing by for orders, sir.
Midway.
EAA Mid-Ocean Air Base number 2, Midway Island, standing by for orders.
Number 2, Midway, standing by for orders, sir.
Wake Island.
EAA Trans-Pacific Air Base number 3, Wake Island, standing by for orders.
Pan American Ocean Air Base, standing by for orders, sir.
Guam.
EAA Mid-Ocean Air Base number 4, Guam, standing by for orders.
Guam, ready and standing by for orders, sir.
Manila.
EAA Trans-Pacific Air Terminal, Manila, ready and standing by, sir.
Republic of the Philippines, ready and standing by for orders, sir.
I have the honor to report that the Trans-Pacific Airway is ready to inaugurate airmail service of the United States Post Office from the mainland across the Pacific to the Philippines by way of Hawaii, Midway, Wake, and Guam Islands. Captain Pritchett, you have your sailing orders. Cast off and depart from Manila in accordance therewith.
Aye, sir.
This time, fly over the bridge.
November 22nd, 1935, the new Martin China Clipper was loaded with mail as Postmaster General James A. Farley wished it Godspeed for the nation. Its destination, Manila, the first commercial flight across the Pacific, and for the Pan Am team headed by Juan Trippe, the culmination of years of work. Radio and newspapers followed the Clipper across the Pacific. 21 hours to Honolulu.
It's Captain Sigfred, S-I-G-F-R-E-D. I flew the Clippers during the 30s up until 1942. And then I finished up my time until I retired out of Miami. Flew the African run in South America and so on. I am 85 years old and flew had a total time of 17,000 hours. In the old days, we'd load the ship according to the weather. And if the forecast run over 30 hours, we could not go. So they'd start taking the passengers off, take the soundproofing out, take the seats out, and ship them over to Honolulu. And if they had to take the crew off, they wouldn't go. All they'd carry would be the mail. It's such a revelation. I just taken my first, yesterday was my first trip in a jet, and I'm astounded at the amount of people and weight they could put out without weighing. In the old days, they weighed every ounce that went on this ship. They even took the specific gravity of the gasoline and figured, instead of figuring 6 pounds per gallon, they figured if it was 5.8, they'd use that so they could cram on all they could.
My name is Charles Bellier. I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. I used to fly with Pan American from 1940 to about 1946. I made about half a dozen trips on both the China and Philippine Clipper, besides the larger boats when they were put in service.
I'm James Airy. I'm System Director of Public Relations at Pan Am, and my department was one of the departments of many at the company that put this program together. It's designed to demonstrate what's happened over the last 50 years in the Pacific, coming from the China Clipper flying boat to the 747. The program took us about 2.5 months in the planning. We patterned it a lot like our round-the-world flights that we did in 1976 and 1977, where we took a 747 SP and flew it around the world, and in the process setting a number of marks. We have a number of passengers on this China Clipper reenactment flight who were on those 1976 and 77 flights. We've got about 289 passengers on this flight.
My name is Alan S. Wright, and I am the youngest son of C.D. Wright, Chan Wright, who was the first engineering officer on the maiden voyage of the China Clipper, the Pan American China Clipper, that flew to the Orient back in 1935.
My husband was radio operator on the first flight of the China Clipper. As it landed in Manila, they were honored by a dinner given at the Manila Hotel. And this shows that the dinner tables were arranged like the China Clipper. And all of the crew and the members of the were in this particular picture.
Hi, my name is Carmen Bascardal. I'm a Pan Am flight attendant. Very happy to be here in this special occasion. I was one of the lucky 7 winners, and that's one of the reasons I'm here.
I founded Pan Am. Well, I was the first chairman of the board in 1931 and remained so until 1941. And at that time, in the beginning of World War II, in 1942, I resigned and joined the American Army Air Force. Well, I forget the exact year that I started Pan Am, but it was a little before 31. I think it was around 28 that we got going with it. And my friend at Yale was Warren Tripp, and I made him president because I didn't have the time. I was on so many other things at that time, making motion pictures in the mining industry, etc., that I did not have the time to give to it to act as president. So I stayed as chairman of the board, and I gave Warren Tripp, recommended that he be elected as president, which he was. Then, to my great satisfaction, I went down to the dock to meet Mr. Lindbergh, Charles Lindbergh, when he came back from the first transatlantic flight. On the pier where I met him, I introduced myself, said that I was forming a new aviation company called Pan American for world travel, and would he join the company in charge of pioneering and the equipment. He said, yes, I will. I didn't offer him a salary. He just said, yes, I will. Then I said, report to my office tomorrow, which he did, and we told him what his salary would be, and that's how he started to work. So, in short, I am the one who found Warren Tripp and Charles Lindbergh, gave them the 2 most important positions in the company, and they both did a magnificent job. They made Pan American Airways the leading company to fly on, to go places anywhere around the world at that time.
Cruising without incident at a speed of 150 miles an hour, the giant flying boat sets down at her Hawaiian terminal 1 minute late. Time 21 hours. A new age in air transportation had begun. With barely a pause, air lanes were extended out across the great ocean to bases recently transformed from dots of coral.
Hawaii that you've all been familiar with and have read about, and many of you I know have seen it, but we're going to show you the true Pan Am Aloha spirit. Ladies and Ariyoshi. Governor Ariyoshi.
It's my pleasure today to extend the aloha of the people of Hawaii to all of you. I'm truly very honored and very grateful for the opportunity to participate in today's ceremonies commemorating the 50th anniversary of the arrival of the China Clipper. Those of you who came on the plane made it here to Hawaii in approximately 5 hours. When the China Clipper first came to Hawaii, it took them more than 20 hours, almost 22 hours for them to get here. That meant that you could have left the mainland, San Francisco, come here to Hawaii, have gone back there, come back again, and then go back to San Francisco during the time that it took for the China Clipper to reach here from San Francisco. I am truly very grateful for those who had the vision to pioneer aviation, and particularly aviation into this part of the world.
If we could have the model. Governor Ariyoshi. To commemorate the arrival of a slightly faster China Clipper bearing the blue and white Pan Am logo on its tail, and to commemorate all those years of friendship and cooperation, I would like to present to you this model of the original Pan Am China Clipper, and trust that at those moments when it catches your eye, you will experience the same feeling of awe and wonder that I always do. Thank you from everyone at Pan American World Airways, past, present, and future. We're going to finish. We'll finish because I know everybody wants to get out in that beautiful sun. We're here today because of the vision, courage, and determination of those who built this airline from its beginning to its place as a world leader in aviation. The historical aviation link between Pan Am and Hawaii is long and strong. It was Pan Am who flew the first jets here, and the first 747s. And the list is too long to go on and on. But today, the arrival, 50 years ago, of that first China Clipper is being celebrated. And that was an achievement unsurpassed by anything since. I know you have a wonderful stay planned for us here in Hawaii, and we're all planning to begin enjoying it. May I simply say, perhaps with a little touch of too much Texas background in my talk, mahalo and aloha. Thank you.
command them to take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, and there to place them where you lodge this day.
For 1935-1985, 50th anniversary, Trans-Pacific Service. Middle Lock, Pearl City, Peninsula, original landing site of the China Clipper. Further, this plaque was dedicated November 22nd, 1985 by employees of Pan American World Airways during ceremonies honoring 50 years of Trans-Pacific service by Pan American, and we thank them very much for it.
Oh, gee, we need it. Cargo and 48 years ago, I plucked this little grass float, which is a fishing float from Japanese nets, off the shores of Midway Island. And as we land there today on this historic flight, I'm going to give it back to its rightful owners. I've had it 48 years.
Midway Island, 1,200 miles closer to Asia. A place whose chief inhabitants before the airplanes were Goonie birds. Then the air age came to Midway. Everything needed to service an aircraft and its passengers had to be transported and constructed.
historic reenactment and are most pleased to have the opportunity to share a portion of it with you. Today is possibly an historic event on its own. How often does a 747 land today with the resultant doubling of the local population? From 1935 to 1947, Pan Am and our Navy have shared Midway Island. Few realize that these islands were bombarded on December 7, 1941 by Japanese forces returning from the attack on Pearl Harbor. But we all remember the great battle that took place near here in 1942 that proved to be the turning point in the war with Japan.
The historic flight 50 years ago of the China Clipper meant something to people. And it was only possible because of the dedication and vision of people at Pan American World Airways. To have transformed this island into a facility capable of handling that crucial first stop after Honolulu is testimony to what men and women can accomplish if they want to bad enough. Midway represented literally a midway in that flight, and the significance of that hasn't been lost on anyone. I stand here today the beneficiary of all that went before. I'm aware of that, and at the same time extremely proud to be part of an airline that has established more firsts than any other carrier in the history of aviation. We are honored today with the presence of the original chairman of Pan American World Airways, Mr. C.V. Whitney. We also have a number of other very distinguished guests with us. Too many to mention, but I will mention a few. Mr. Michener, Mr. Boyd, Mr. Lindbergh, Mr. Tripp, son of the founder of Pan American World Airways, Mr. Forley, Mr. Hartsfield, one of our distinguished astronauts, and so forth. And to present the model, we would like, if Captain Siegfried, who was one of our original China Clipper pilots, and the uncle of our flight engineer today, Pete Ryden, to make the presentation. Would you please?
This is a glass globe I picked up 48 years ago on the beach here, and I think it's about time I returned it to its rightful owner.
See how they let rest sit on their knees? Yeah.
You walk into the ground?
They're right next to it.
Seven hours by air, 5 days on the surface of the water, 1,000 miles to the southwest, Wake Island, scene of a modern miracle of engineering and determination, where a freighter must unload 5 miles out in rough seas. Heavy equipment brought into Coral Shores, all in a race against time, to meet the demands of business and national defense in a world shrinking in size with each new demonstration of man's technical ingenuity. Wake Island, where vegetables are made to grow without topsoil.
I'd like to Mr. Aker and Mr. Tripp, distinguished visitors, one and all. It certainly is an honor to have you folks here visiting with us on Wake Island. And I'd like to say on behalf of Colonel Clark, 15th Air Base Wing Commander back at Hickam, Major Westmoreland, Detachment 4 Commander here on Wake Island, and all the residents of Wake Island, some of whom you haven't seen and probably won't get a chance to see, we welcome you here to Wake Island. I'd like to give a 2-minute for everyone here on the origin of Wake Island as we know it from our history books, that back in 1935, 50 years ago, Wake Island came about because the insight of Pan American officials to have their Pacific route. Wake Island became one of the stops for crew rest and gassing of the aircraft. Since that time, Wake Island has played a very important role in American history. The name Wake Island is etched in the annals of history. Names along with names like Iwo Jima, Midway, where you have just left, and of course Pearl Harbor.
We're happy to be here on Wake just as the original crew was 50 years ago. Back in 1935, when plans were being made for this journey, two things were evident. First, that the leg between Midway and Wake Island was the shortest of the trip. And second, that it presented the most difficult navigational problem for Captain Music and his crew. With today's technology, we certainly didn't anticipate any problem finding Wake Island. And 50 years ago, China Clipper 1 didn't have any problem either. Of course, it did take them a little longer, 8 hours and 25 minutes to be exact, but they hit it right on the nose. And the reality is that because they did, we're here today to celebrate their achievements. It must have been a strange experience for the bird life on this island to have a big bird with noisy engines entering their airspace for the first time. I'm sure they didn't mind. However, when they saw what the crew of the China Clipper brought them that day, 25 canaries with a pound of bird seed for each one. Not to be outdone, we've brought to you today a new generation of birds to add song to the island. The birds have been given quite a few different names while we've been in process. You can choose your own, but China and Clipper have been suggested. Speaking of birds, we brought a few others along with us. Thanksgiving is next week, and 50 years ago, the crew of China Clipper 1 brought to the people manning this island a supply of Thanksgiving turkeys. May I present to you, on behalf of your fellow Americans, a new generation of turkeys that no doubt will suffer the same fate as their forebears.
Another island hop toward the mainland of Asia, to Guam.
Very close with the Spanish. We say, and if it's a low tide, you can walk all the way out to the reef, and you can just go swimming out there, get your mat, and you snorkeling. No, and you know, if
Mr. Acker, there is no finer or more appropriate way for us to welcome you back to our island than to present to you our leader of the people of Guam. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Acker, the governor of the territory, the Honorable Ricardo J. Bordaglia.
Everything here, of course, today is so historical. I'm pleased and honored to be here at this special ceremony and at this very special place.
From the air, it looked effortless. 59 hours and 48 minutes flying time from America to the Philippines, to the busy, bustling city of Manila. In another year, it's on to China. Modern Magellans, completing more than just another trade route. Pioneers in the establishment of new facets of international trade. Stretching the perimeter of modern life and science. Willing to take on the responsibilities of leading the way through the skies.
where Dr. Jose Rizal, our national hero, was held by the Spaniards. It now serves
From here, we're going to bring you inside the largest in area of all the war memorials built and administered by the American.
How are you today, Stan?
First Lady of the Republic of the Philippines, Mrs. Imelda Marcos. We're going to skip the next gentleman for a moment and go on to Ambassador Stephen Bosworth, U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines. The next gentleman we owe a thundering round of applause to, Mr. Franz Schutman, General Manager of the Manila Hotel. It wasn't quite up to the China Clipper standard, but not bad.
The Filipino people
States and the American people. Regrettably, there are forces today that seem to destroy the strong and historic bonds of friendship between our two peoples. Perhaps the media in particular has succeeded in creating apprehensions about the stability of our democratic institutions and processes, the wisdom and strength of our political leadership, and the stability of our economic system.
.152 miles out of San Francisco. The Clipper is bucking strong headwinds and approaching predicted storm front. Ocean time, midnight. Captain reports routine order aboard ship.
Effortless precision that thrilled a watching world. On to Midway, Wake, and Guam. Into her base at Manila. In all the stirring history of the Great Pacific, there can be no more thrilling chapter. The China Clippers sail again.